Today, we're diving into modern myths, ancient code, and we're going to explore how the stories that absolutely shape our world today are basically running on a very, very old operating system. Let's kick things off with a modern god you might know. Think about Kratos, the ghost of Sparta. I mean, this is a demigod who is defined by pure tragic rage, a guy who literally tore down the entire Greek pantheon with his bare hands. He's one of the most iconic characters in modern entertainment for a reason. But then, after all that unbelievable destruction, his story takes this wild turn. He escapes. He goes to a new land, a whole new mythology. That rage, it's still there, simmering under the surface. But now it's buried under this massive, profound responsibility. The god of war becomes a father, desperately trying to raise his son in a world that only knows him as a monster. So the question is, how do you even tell a story that huge? A story about fundamentally changing your very nature, about trying to outrun your past? Well, it turns out the blueprint for a story like that, it's thousands of years old. See, our obsession with characters like Kratos or Thor or Percy Jackson, it's not new, not at all. We're tapping into something much, much older. And here is the single most important idea for today. Our most popular books, movies, video games, they are all running on ancient software. They're using these foundational mythic patterns to explore the same human questions we've always been asking. To really get how this works, we need to stop thinking of mythology as just a collection of dusty old tales. Instead, think of it as a kind of language, a universal grammar for telling stories. And right away, let's just throw out the idea that a myth is just a false story. That's not what we're talking about here. A myth is a culture's operating system. It's the symbolic code a society uses to map out the world, to understand its place in the cosmos, and really to give some meaning to the beautiful chaos of life. It's this incredibly powerful framework, a shared human grammar for making sense of the world, and it's been used by countless cultures for millennia. So, how does this grammar actually work in practice? Well, let's start with the most fundamental question of all, right? Where did all this come from? What's so fascinating is how two cultures can start from a similar idea, this formless void, and end up in completely different places. For the Greeks, the world erupts from chaos, a violent mess. Order is only ever achieved through brutal conflict, sons overthrowing fathers. It tells you their worldview is shaped by struggle. But now, contrast that with the Egyptians. For them, the world emerges from the orderly, life-giving waters of noon. The creator god brings forth the universe through deliberate spoken words. Their entire culture was built on this idea of cosmic balance, what they called ma'at. And we see this pattern again and again. The Norse believe the world was forged through violent, creative destruction. Odin and his brothers kill the giant Ymir and literally build the world from his corpse. For them, life comes directly from death. Now compare that to the Japanese Shinto myth. There, the divine siblings Izanagi and Izanami create the world through a super precise, cooperative ritual. When the ritual goes wrong, a monster is born. When they get it right, they create the beautiful islands of Japan. It's a worldview built on harmony and proper order, not sacrifice. Okay, so this same universal grammar also applies to characters. Let's look at maybe the most powerful archetype of all, the hero. You know, at first glance, these three guys seem pretty similar. They're all divinely connected, they're all incredibly strong, but if you look at their core missions, you see what their cultures truly valued. Hercules is driven by a deep need for atonement. It's a personal story about overcoming his own inner demons. Thor's mission is totally external. He's a protector, defending his realm out of a sense of duty. And Susanoo, the storm god, he has to find redemption by learning to channel his destructive power for good. Atonement, protection, redemption. Each culture uses that same hero blueprint to explore a totally different core value. So you see the pattern, right? The archetype of the hero is the constant. But the story that gets told with that archetype, well, that reveals everything about the culture that created it. Which brings us all the way back to today. Why do we keep coming back to these ancient patterns? It's because they give modern storytellers a powerful shorthand, a way to explore our own world. Think of it like a recipe. You start with a timeless archetype, like the ruler, embodied by the Norse god Odin. Then you add a modern relatable flaw, in this case, the crushing weight of his secrets and his totally dysfunctional family. And what do you get? You get the complex, burdened kings we see in the Marvel films and the God of War games. These incredibly powerful figures who are just wrestling with the consequences of their own choices. And once you start looking for it, you see this happening everywhere. Marvel takes the complex Norse myths and boils them down into a super relatable story about two brothers. God of War brilliantly pits Greek tragic rage against the Norse idea of inescapable fate. Authors like Madeline Miller are reclaiming minor characters like Circe to explore modern feminism. And a series like Percy Jackson just maps the entire ancient hero's journey onto the anxieties of being a modern teenager. And that's the key. These aren't just lazy retellings or reboots. What creators are doing is using these ancient, pre-coded patterns to have really important new conversations about our own world, about family, identity, power, you name it. The modern myth maker Neil Gaiman took this whole idea to its logical conclusion in his amazing novel American Gods. He basically suggested that our belief is what creates gods, and today we're starting to forget the old ones in favor of these powerful new deities, like technology, media, and globalization. And that leaves us with one final, really fascinating question. If myths really are the operating systems for our culture, and our stories reflect what we truly believe in, what gods are we creating right now? What are the stories we're telling today that will become the myths of the future?